I've been trying to do video topics that could bring in a wider audience. So what better to do than this super specific Danish island that I would imagine a lot of people don't know about. But it's very interesting because take a look at this map. It shows us that island in the middle of the Baltic Sea in Northern Europe. Its name is Bornholm. It's relatively small with only around 588 square kilometers. It's home to about 40,000 people, a third of which live in the largest settlement there, Ron. It flies a Nordic cross flag of red and green with a fantastic golden dragon red coat of arms. There's nothing that special about it other than being a cool place to vacation apparently, but I've always wondered something about it, which is why is it a part of Denmark? When you look at its location in the Baltic Sea, you can instantly tell that Denmark isn't the country that is closest to. In fact, if you measure the distances, it's closest to Sweden at 41 kilometers, then to Germany at 85 kilometers, then to Poland at 102, and only then to Denmark at 137 kilometers away. Now, this isn't a unique case to Denmark. They also technically rule over the Faroe Islands, where the closest country is Scotland, or Greenland, where the closest country is Canada. And throughout its history, this island was a heavily fought over territory. I mean, it makes sense. Its placement is strategic to controlling sea routes across the Baltic Sea. At times, it was in fact ruled by the Swedish or even by the Hanseatic German city of Lübeck. But the reason why it remained Danish up to today is quite interesting. So in this video, I'm going to tell you that story, why the island is Danish and not German, Polish, or Swedish. Guys, I just posted an exclusive video on Patreon where I rate European flags. I'm going to be doing this for other continents, and I'm going to be posting more exclusive content over on Patreon. So if you want to support the channel and get something in return, make sure to join us there as well. Rising from the high sea, the natural features of the island are where they get their name. In Old Norse, the island was known as Borgundahome, connected to the ancient Norse words Borg meaning height and Bjarg meaning mountain or rock. A fun fact, it was the original homeland of the Burgundian people, an ancient Scandinavian group that moved to continental Europe in around the 1st century, setting up the kingdom of Burgundy in southern France, and then giving its name to the Duchy of Burgundy further north. France still has a region using the same name today. The island was ruled by its own people for a while. During the Viking Age, they even had a king of their own. And for a long time, it didn't even have any organized towns or villages, just scattered farms and houses, along with some fortifications. Around the year 1080, the local Viking rulers were driven out, and the island was conquered by the Danes. Christian missionaries came to the island with them and converted the locals, slowly cementing a Danish cultural identity that would last through time. Between the 9th and 12th centuries, there were some attempts by Slavic raiders to take over the island, most likely coming from what is now the coast of Poland, but all incursions seem to have failed. The locals fortified their churches and made their stands there, driving away the Slavs. Since then, the Danish ruled it for centuries as a distant territory along with Scania, their domain in what is now southern Sweden. It was the feudal age, so I would guess not much change for the people that lived there. It's just suddenly they had another ruler that their ruler reported to, and that was the Danish king. Now, before we keep going with the video, I need to take a minute to tell you about our partner for this video, BetterHelp. Now, I saw a few comments in the last video talking about some issues that they could potentially face, but I think it's important to know that those issues were in the past and they have all been resolved. BetterHelp is an online therapy service, and in fact, it's the biggest in the world. Through it, you can access a network of thousands of therapists that are ready to help you. All you do is go on their website, fill out a form, and then you get matched with a specific therapist that the platform thinks will be a good fit for you. You start out your sessions, and then if you realize that they're not a good fit, you can switch to a new one at no additional cost. You can schedule your sessions to whenever you like via text, phone call, or a video call, really giving you control over how you want the process to go. So if you want to try out BetterHelp today, just go to betterhelp.com/generalknowledge and you can get 10% off your first month. Now, let's get back to the video. 200 years later, one of those kings, Frederick I, gave the island away to Lübeck, a medieval German free city which was part of the Hanseatic League. In fact, it was the city that was its informal capital. When we look at a map of the Hanseatic League, it's quite interesting to consider Bornholm's position in it. Denmark wasn't a member. Only the coastal cities and states of Pomerania, Prussia, the Netherlands, some other German states, and then some in Estonia, Latvia, and a bit of Sweden. But the League held many trading outposts in other cities and states along its main trade routes. They were called kontors and existed in major cities. And while there was no kontor in Bornholm, the map of the League's main trade routes show us how the sea and land connection that ranged from London to Novgorod passed directly through Bornholm's surrounding water. I mean, how could it not, given the island's central location in the Baltic Sea? And I believe the fact that there was a temporary Danish transfer of the island to Lübeck, a key member of the League, showcases the island's importance at the time. The reasons for the transfer are actually quite interesting. It was given only for the period of 50 years and served the purpose of guaranteeing a loan from the Lübeckers, as well as being a thank you for the expulsion of former Danish king Christian II, Frederick's predecessor and rival to the throne. But this short alliance between Denmark and Lübeck wasn't always the case. In fact, several wars were fought between the two entities, the main one being the adequately named Danish-Hanseatic War between 1361 and 1370. And on one side or the other, Hanseatic intrusion into Danish successory issues seemed to be pretty common. When Danish King Olav II died, a succession dispute erupted over Denmark and Norway, which were united at the time, between Albert of Mecklenburg, King of Sweden, and Margaret I, Queen of Denmark. This was further complicated when Swedish nobles rebelled against Albert and invited Margaret to be their queen. What a mess. Albert was taken prisoner in 1389, but hired privateers in 1392, the so-called Victual brothers, who took Bornholm and Visby in his name, two important islands in the Baltic at the time, one Danish and one Swedish. Margaret went on to become Queen of Denmark and formed the Kalmar Union, ruling over most of the Nordics, including, of course, Bornholm. But fast forward to 1575, when Denmark got the island back after that 50-year lease to the Lübecks. Even after local rulers, Hanseatic opponents, crown rivals, and hired privateers, the external threats toward Bornholm weren't finished. After the dissolution of the Kalmar Union in 1523, a series of wars took place between Denmark and Sweden, now each their own country again. The main issue of the wars was precisely control over the Baltic and its associated trade routes, so of course that Bornholm was also in play. While Denmark initially had the upper hand in these wars, Sweden quickly recovered and had the superiority. Attempting to avoid a total defeat, the Danish agreed to the Peace of Roskilde in 1658. In it, Sweden acquired most of Scania, which they have up to today, part of Norway, and the island of Bornholm. However, while the island locals had once favored independence, they now liked being Danish, and having a Swedish king didn't please them at all. As soon as the new Swedish governor arrived with around 100 troops, the locals started conspiring against them. The governor, Johan Britsenskold, wrote, "The island is endowed with an exceptionally good and fertile soil, such that it has been regarded as the finest land, both by its own inhabitants and by others, that has belonged to the Kingdom of Denmark." The locals brought a lot of concerns to the governor, but he ignored most of them and simply began exploiting the island for its goods and resources, which brought about a lot of discontent. The final straw was when the young men of Borholm started being conscripted by the Swedish to fight their war in Pomerania. Regarding taxation, the first quote of the governor contrasts with this later one. "I could by no means have imagined that the island would be so devoid of resources and money as it is, and I doubt that the common people can pay the first installment in cash, but only in goods." Quickly, that lack of resources hit the Swedish soldiers themselves, which found themselves out of supplies and became more vulnerable to the wrath of the locals. The Swedish governor was assassinated and the islanders took over control, remaining loyal to the Danish. At the same time, Denmark went back to war with Sweden, and a new peace of Copenhagen in 1660 returned official control of the island to the Danish crown. And so the two periods of foreign control over the island were over, and Bornholm remained Danish ever since. It was briefly occupied by the Germans during World War II, who at one time stationed up to 12,000 soldiers in the island, contrasting pretty greatly with the around 100 or 120 Swedish soldiers that were there before. Soviet forces invaded and kicked out the Germans, but left as soon as mainland Denmark was liberated by the Western Front Allied forces. It's quite an interesting detail of this period of history. The moment that determined it would be the British and North American forces to liberate Denmark was when the British Second Army reached Lübeck, the old Hanseatic city that once ruled Bornholm. The British seizure of the city ended any hopes that Stalin may have had of liberating Denmark and adding it to its post-war sphere of influence. However, and interestingly, Bornholm was suddenly geographically placed behind the Iron Curtain longitude lines during the Cold War. At the Yalta Conference in February of 1945, it was agreed that the dividing line between East and West Europe would lie along the River Elbe. Bornholm was well east of the Elbe and north of what would become the westernmost part of Poland and eastern Germany. Because of this, the USSR took the position that if Western Europe or the US stationed troops on the island, such would be considered an act of war against the Soviet Union. While it seems that no NATO troops ever stationed there, the island remained a relevant location during the Cold War. In 1953, a Polish pilot defected from the Eastern Bloc and landed his MiG-15 on the island, providing intelligence to the West. And decades after the collapse of the USSR and the end of the Cold War, Denmark's intelligence services built a listening tower in Bornholm to intercept Russian communications across the Baltic Sea. And so we understand how, despite being closer to both Germany and Sweden and even being temporarily ruled by some of these people throughout history, the island remained Danish. As for the Polish, it seems that despite their close proximity, they were just never interested in conquering the island, other than those early incursions by Slavic people in the early Middle Ages. Essentially, Bornholm was Danish from very early on in history, when Denmark ruled lands much vaster than the ones they have today. And while they lost most of those other lands, Bornholm remained theirs due to the desire of the locals. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you to my patrons for supporting me directly. If you want to support the channel directly, make sure to join us there. If not, that is totally fine. And I will see you next time for more general knowledge. Today's Movement Cup is, I think we're going to go into the repeat section. This one, it's one of the most simple ones. It's just a little girl. I don't know if it's the same one. She looks the same, but they could be twins. Never know.